Again, make yourself as at home. Coffee's still there, pastries are still there. I feel like I need to remind people to take care of themselves, keep caffeinated. So we're starting at the institutional level. So our first panel is called Navigating Institutional, Religious, and Spiritual Identities, and we have 3 fantastic speakers. The full bios for all of our speakers are on, if you scan the QR code, it's very nifty. I feel like a modern restaurant. Like, just scan the QR code, you don't need a menu. So I'll just give the title of our speakers and then I'll let them work their magic. So our first speaker, Siddartha V. Shah, is the John Wieland 1958 director of the Mead Art Museum at Amherst College. Elliot Mackin is the curator and study center manager at the Icon Museum and Study Center in Clinton, Massachusetts. And Christine Ronan is the project manager for the World Faiths Initiative at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. And so each speaker will come up, give their presentation, and at the end we'll have all of our panelists up for a Q&A. So please join me in welcoming Siddartha. Okay. And then he'll get your presentation, magically make it happen.
Okay, great.
Not very tech-oriented.
Good morning, everyone. What a great start already. And of course, this is not a space of competition, so I'm not even going to think about what a tough act to follow that was. Hopefully, we're just with 15 minutes just scratching the surface, and the surface will just continue to get scratched throughout the day. So I'm just going to dive into story time now. I first visited Amherst College in 2022 when I was invited to interview to be the museum's next director of the college's Mead Art Museum. And on the eve of my interviews, my partner and I decided to explore the campus a bit. And it was lovely. It's kind of everything you'd imagine a New England campus would be. Some parts are really breathtakingly beautiful. But as we approached the art museum, everything changed. I wish I had more than just this one photo, but alas, here it is. The building was surrounded by a chain link fence with this sign on it that really isn't conveying the sort of messaging that museums are trying to these days. Enclosed behind the fence were weeds and overgrown grass, and a towering structure that was covered with so much scaffolding it just looked like this 150-foot tall Jenga tower. It was truly the most unloved museum I had ever seen. I won't go into what I said to my partner when I saw this, or the incredible irony of the moment, and how I've never regretted taking that job or bringing the museum back to life. But I will share here that when I arrived, the Mead had been closed for nearly 3 years. First due to the pandemic in March 2020, but then because of structural issues with the infamous stern steeple, that towering structure just outside the museum, which risked toppling onto our building. It is the lone remnant of a church that had once stood on this site of our museum. And I learned very quickly that the staff had lots of feelings about this steeple. And even I started resenting it, referring to it loudly, publicly, and often as the non-functional phallus of Amherst's religious past. Resentful for all of the resources that were being poured into keeping that thing up, while our museum remained closed, understaffed, under-resourced, and profoundly undervalued. But as with so many things in my personal and professional life, the rupture or the wound, that loathsome steeple, transformed into an opportunity. And the steeple has become a beacon, and as well as a gateway through which authentic transformation of our museum has begun to take place. So a bit on the college's religious past. Though it is among the most liberal arts colleges one could imagine, Amherst College, and note that the H is silent, was established in 1821 for, quote, the education of young men of piety and talents for the Christian ministry. And traces of its religious past are certainly present, including in our museum. These impressive Assyrian reliefs, for example, arrived in 1855 because Amherst President Edward Hitchcock felt that, quote, seeing them will strengthen Christians in their faith in the Bible, and above all, awaken a missionary spirit among students. The reliefs were sliced off the remains of Assur-Nasr Paul II's palace in Nineveh and cut into fragments to be enshrined at Amherst as evidence of the validity of biblical history. Their means of extraction and exportation are certainly problematic by today's standards, and the gallery in which these glorious works are currently displayed is among the least visited at our museum. And though the campus already had a large and impressive chapel in the 1820s, Amherst's fourth president, William Sturz, wanted to build a new church specifically for the cultivation of Christian aesthetics. And construction on this building was completed in 1873. But the church came with a caveat. And were there more time, I would love to tell you about how much this looks like Gothic art, Gothic architecture in India, because it was funded by a fortune being made in Bombay. The building came with a caveat that would ultimately seal its fate. It was to be used for strictly religious observances, especially for Christian worship and preaching, and for no other purpose. So as the college grew more secular over time, all this proved quite anachronistic. And in 1933, just 60 years after it was constructed, the trustees voted to tear it down, to make room for an arts building funded by William Rutherford Mead of the legendary American architecture firm McKim, Mead & White. So the Mead Art Building opened in 1949, with the steeple remaining as the lone, somewhat awkward remnant of the church that once stood there. And when Mead made his gift to fund a new arts building, his hope was that the study of art at Amherst College should not just be an intellectual pursuit, as one might expect at an academic institution, but in his words, that every student should relate to it with feelings, with emotion, with love. Now, the fact that the donor wanted to activate the hearts of students and that we stand on the site of a church have together been a guiding principle in redefining the museum today and into the future. And to this I'll add how fascinating it is that I, a Hindu raised in a devotional family, should be the director that willingly turns to Amherst's religious past for inspiration and guidance. And I share this because of how my own path to studying art history was grounded in my own religious upbringing. I was born in Illinois to parents who immigrated from India in the 1960s. This is us. I'm the little gay boy who knows his angles. And while my father and my brother are both physicians, I took after my mother, a devotee who loves beautiful things. And our home was plastered with sacred imagery, mostly Hindu, but really from many different traditions, including images of the Virgin Mary, Christian saints, and of course, Mother Teresa. I share this because I grew up truly without a clear distinction between art and the divine. And one important aspect of Hindu worship is darshan, or auspicious seeing, gazing deeply upon an image and being in deep communion with it. And my mother would pause in front of every image, one by one, to look deeply and offer fire every day, sometimes multiple times a day. I learned to look at art by watching my mother look at God. And I looked at Hindu gods with the same intensity as I gazed upon Monet's haystacks at the Art Institute of Chicago. I feel like this is going to be a theme, the Art Institute of Chicago. I found solace in Our Lady of Antwerp when I was a teenager living in Belgium and dealing with the death of my beloved great-grandmother, just as the beheading of Lady Jane in London supported me as I approached one of the greatest challenges of my life, coming out to my parents. A painting of an innocent girl who was harmed because society simply couldn't see her, accept her, or decipher her power. This was precisely what I needed at that moment. So in these moments when we are yearning or broken, I don't believe that religion is the only source of solace. I believe that looking closely and deeply, to stand metaphorically naked before the majesty of creation, can provide us with the support that we often seek. So I do wonder, can our museum also be a space of congregation and reflection, like the church that was there before? Can the Mead welcome and hold a variety of feelings, and where people can come and contemplate some of the biggest, most challenging questions of life, which at the age of a college student may seem even bigger than they already are. Questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What is this world I live in, and how am I supposed to make it through? So with this intention to imagine a museum as a sacred space, it's present and guides our work at the Mead. But we don't have the answers of how to do this, so I'll share some of our efforts with you. Now, one similarity I see between museums and sacred spaces is the anxiety that many feel about not knowing how to be or what to do. At Amherst, we are the first art museum that many of our students ever attend. And not knowing how to be in an art museum really does provide anxiety for some of them. So in thinking about my own experiences in churches and cathedrals, I realized that the experience of awe somehow creates a palpable sense that one can move through at any pace. And the abundance of seating silently conveys a generous invitation to sit if one wishes, without communicating that that is what one is supposed to do. So as a team, in addition to just providing a lot more intentional seating throughout our museum, we've thought about how to replicate a feeling of awe and an invitation to move through our spaces differently than in other museums where you might typically look at art and read labels on the walls. So last year, I curated this exhibition with a Canadian artist that included textiles, drawings, papermaking, paintings. And the goal of this truly was to disorient the body in this space. And as people walked in, they stopped because they didn't know what to do and where to look. And as they looked up and all around, they started moving through the space, not seeking to understand the work as much as connect with what the work was making them feel. And you can see the benches there. People did take their shoes off and lay down on the benches. On the first day, a student came in and just started knitting. It was this invitational space that we were trying to create through simply encouraging people to look in all different directions. And if you look at, and I believe this really changed us from a site of just looking at and learning about art to a respite, a sanctuary, and a space for all. And if you go to the Mead's social media page, you'll see that just last week we hosted a party that was just like children dancing and wearing costumes and singing together to really turn the museum into a space like this. Now, in terms of community building and thinking of the museum as a space of support, I'll say that we've essentially stopped almost all of our public programs, all of our traditional public programs. We've stopped artist talks, director or curator in conversation with artists, an exhibition of, let's say, textiles, and then having a block printing workshop. And we have turned much more to talking circles. So the idea is that students or the general public will come in, they will move through this space for a period of 30 or so minutes, and then come together for a facilitated discussion, often around really challenging subjects. But it is a space of reflection, of sharing, and then they're invited to revisit the work, and it's always followed by a meal. And all of this is creating, it's having a much bigger impact than just piling a bunch of people into a room and having an artist talk. So we're increasingly shifting to this talking circle process, and this has also led to conversations with the Center for Counseling and Mental Health about group therapy sessions being held in one of our historic rooms, and the work that I've been doing with some of our chaplains, who, as I mentioned, Amherst is a secular, very liberal school, which means for those students who do identify with a faith, it can feel a little uncomfortable. And we're noticing that a lot of the Jewish and Muslim students in particular are really struggling. So how can the works in our collection be activated to support them at this time? The last thing I'm going to mention here, and this is really the most open-ended question, which is dealing with difficult material. I am showing you here a plate from the dessert service that belonged to Lord Geoffrey Amherst, a kind of objectively terrible man. And this is one of many plates and bowls and saucers and cups we have that have two almost naked Indigenous men chained and shackled to his coat of arms. Indigenous professors at the college for years had said these objects can never come out. Nothing good ever comes from them. I have actually spent a lot of time looking at racist material because I think there is value, particularly around British India. There is value in looking at these images so that I can recognize those dynamics when they are present today, and they are. And so we questioned how to display these works in a way that would not just be honoring them, venerating them with a label. So we showed the stacks of just how many we have to really amplify the problem here, and invited people to look in. And that physical gesture also didn't impose this on anybody. But we were not shying away from the difficult material. And then I'll close with this image here. So there is this bizarre tradition at Amherst College. So it was a men's college until 1976, of this statue of a water nymph named Sabrina, naked. She has been thrown down a well, taken an axe to the face, her ear has been cut off, her foot has been cut off, she's been dressed in women's underwear, she's been fondled, chained, and it's a tradition of abduction. So, and Amherst doesn't have that many traditions. So we wanted to talk about this tradition. And really, we called it Open Admissions. It was the name of the exhibition, because Amherst is clearly not an open admissions school, but we needed to openly admit our past. And the students were so moved by our engaging with this difficult material that the students who had Sabrina in their possession brought her to the museum. So she's always in hiding, to actually have a conversation of how this tradition can continue, but in a way that is not so disrespectful to women. And Sabrina is now in the care. She came on the full moon and disappeared on the new moon, and is in the care of women students. And all of this was possible because of the exhibition. So with that, I guess the question that I have, and I don't have the answer for, is, what is it about a sacred space that truly makes it welcoming to both comfort and discomfort? That we go for birth, we go for death, we go to celebrate love, we go when the heart is broken. What is it about a sacred space that gives us the strength to stand on the bones of breakdown until we reach breakthrough? And how can art museums hold that level of complexity to not trigger people and not tell people what to feel, but that it can hold all of it? That is now the big question that I have for the Mead's future. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Elliot Mackin. I am the Associate Curator and Study Center Manager at the Icon Museum and Study Center in Clinton, Massachusetts. How many of you have been to the Icon Museum and Study Center? Oh my goodness, wow, that's pretty good. Was it the Icon Museum when you came, or was it the Museum of the Russian Icon? It was the old one, for one. Okay, that's good. So this is a very special place. I've worked there since September, so I'm one of the museum's newest acquisitions. It's a place that I think is still sort of discovering its identity, and I want to take today as an opportunity to guide you through the space, to introduce you to this place that I've become very fond of very quickly. Charmingly situated on the south side of what locals like to call the original Central Park in Clinton, Massachusetts, is the Icon Museum and Study Center. The museum is set within a handsome 19th century red brick building that, at various points, served as a courthouse, a jail, and a stable. Now celebrating our 20th anniversary, we are home to what we think is the largest museum collection of icons in the Western Hemisphere, with roughly 1,000 icons ranging from a 2nd century Fayum mummy portrait to masterpieces of late imperial Russia, painted on the eve of the Bolshevik Revolution. As such, the Icon Museum and Study Center holds the distinction of being the only American institution solely dedicated to sharing, studying, and preserving Eastern Christian sacred art. For many guests, it comes as a surprise, not knowing what they will encounter when they pass through the modest brick exterior of the building. When their eyes adjust to the low light of the galleries, they find themselves surrounded by glowing images on dark walls with almond-shaped eyes staring out from Russia, Ethiopia, and Greece. Almost by accident, the museum captures an experience common to many historic Orthodox churches. A bright but modest stone or brick facade opens to reveal an interior that feels much larger than the exterior could have contained. Visitors and pilgrims enter into the middle of a 3-floor space with a large open staircase, giving visitors a sense of spiraling motion across time. The entrance gallery introduces visitors to the temporal, geographic, and cultural breadth of the museum's collection. Facing visitors when they enter the gallery is a set of 12 icons from a feast day tier of a 16th century icon screen from northern Russia. These are flanked by carved icons from Mount Athos and Greece, and again painted icons from Venetian Crete and 18th century Ethiopia. From this gallery space, visitors make their way down the stairs into our crypt-like basement, replete with original 19th century jail cells. Interns typically choose to work in these spaces. They're not made to, but they like them for some reason. This space serves as an orientation gallery that presents to visitors a few origins for icons and for our museum. Greeting guests at the base of the stairs is a recently acquired panel painting of a man from 2nd century Roman Egypt. This remarkable Fayum mummy portrait evokes the Greco-Roman painting tradition closely related to early Christian panel painting. To the left of this solemn death mask is another memorial of sorts, an eclectic assemblage of Russian icons arranged in a diamond and varying in date and quality, accompany a wall text that introduces visitors to Gordon Langton. Langton, a native of Peoria, Illinois, adopted Clinton, Massachusetts as his home, and from there founded a highly successful plastics manufacturing company. On a business trip to Moscow in the late 1980s, Gordon picked up a 19th century folk icon of St. Nicholas and promptly fell in love. Over the next 30 years, he would build the largest private collection of Russian icons outside of Russia. Around the year 2000, Gordon's wife, Janet, told him that the house was full and that he had to do something with the icons. We have a lot to thank Janet for. It was then that he bought and refurbished 2 abandoned buildings in the center of Clinton, and in 2006 opened the Museum of the Russian Icon, today the Icon Museum and Study Center. It was a gift back to the community that had taken him in and supported his business. Gordon was neither Slavic nor Orthodox. He does not seem to have been, I did not meet Gordon. Many people who work at the museum did know Gordon and remember him fondly. He doesn't seem to have been a particularly churchy man. He and his wife went to a Presbyterian church when she told him to, a theme in our institution. Yet there was something in the icons that struck his heart. And while Orthodox visitors are often unfamiliar with this manner of displaying icons shown in our space dedicated to Gordon, visitors who are interested in the history of collecting are particularly drawn to our founder's story. Passing around the base of the stairs in our crypt-like basement is a wall with elaborately adorned icons of the Mother of God and a display showing the multi-step process behind icon painting, featuring modern copies of 19th century icon. Together, these offer an introduction to iconography for visitors interested in both the artistic and devotional origins of the tradition. Ascending back up the spiral stairs past the entrance gallery to the top floor, visitors enter the heart of the museum. Soaring ceilings, open rafters, rich dark wood, and charcoal walls frame the Slavic masterpieces that make up the core of the Icon Museum's collection. A slender panel of John the Forerunner, John the Baptist in the Eastern tradition, is a rare masterpiece of 15th century Russian panel painting. It beckons people into the gallery. Passing John's emaciated figure, visitors enter a space dedicated to icons of the church and of the home, including iconostasis doors, iconostasis doors from the early 17th century and a portable folding pilgrimage icon in the shape of an iconostasis, painted in a medieval style that was popular in 19th century Russia. In the corner is a small book that is one of my favorite pieces in the museum and one that I frequently feature in my tours. Sold to the museum as a printed 19th century copy of John Climacus's widely popular 7th century spiritual classic, The Ladder of Divine Ascent, shortly after arriving at the museum, the codex was identified as indeed a hand-copied manuscript that carefully followed a popular printed edition of the text. The scribe painstakingly rendered the typeface and page layout of the printed copy, and then recorded his labors with an inscription in the back of the manuscript, writing, "As if embarking on a journey, I was very afraid to start this soul-saving book of Blessed John of the Ladder, and indeed to finish it. Inscribed by the sinful monk Joseph on April 11th, in the year since the creation of the world 7,345, that is 1837. Immediately to the right of the Langton Codex, as John's manuscript is now known, is a vivid 19th century panel that visualizes this well-known 30-chapter text as a 30-rung ladder by which the faithful ascend to God. The next section is dedicated to icons of the saints. A favorite with visitors and indeed pilgrims is a delicately painted reliquary icon containing relics of 14 saints, including such luminaries as Ephraim the Syrian and Sergius of Radonezh. A plexiglass covering allows pilgrims to kiss the relics at no risk to the painted icon itself or its silver revetment. This icon is one of 3 in our collection that contains relics and is part of an ongoing discussion in the museum about developing a policy to guide the future acquisition and display of icons containing saints' remains. To this end, in 2027, the museum plans to install a new hallway gallery dedicated to the interrelated themes of pilgrimage and monasticism. This space will introduce visitors to the devotional use of icons and also function as a more private space conducive for pilgrims to pray and venerate the relics. The south wall of the Langton Gallery is dominated by an immense 17th century icon of Christ enthroned in glory. This icon was originally the centerpiece for a large icon screen, and in its scale and subject matter evokes the awe-inspiring quality of monumental Russian church decoration. Passing by Christ's watchful gaze, visitors enter a transitional space between the Slavic world of the Langton Gallery and the new Greek Icon Gallery. The opening of our new permanent Greek Icon Gallery in October of 2025 marked a major milestone in the museum's history as we mature from our founders' Museum of the Russian Icon into the Icon Museum and Study Center, living into our identity as a leading center for the study and appreciation of the whole world of Eastern Christian sacred art. The Greek Gallery opens with a wall of late Byzantine and post-Byzantine icons that speak to the final flourishing of late imperial icon painting. Facing the length of the gallery, visitors encounter 2 parallel strains of Greek icon painting set in conversation with one another. To the left are icons painted in the Venetian colony of Crete. These icons are marked by a certain stylistic conservatism, remaining faithful to Byzantine artistic conventions while marketing themselves both to Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Christians. On the opposite wall, however, are icons that adopt and adapt the iconographies and styles of Western European Renaissance art. In the center of the room are icons like these 16th century masterpieces by Georgios Klontsis that blend the narrative drama of Western European sacred art with the forms and conventions inherited from Byzantium. Passing back out into the rounded space of the Langton Gallery, visitors enter a section of icons dedicated to the Mother of God. A small niche in the corner contains a delicate little panel dated to the 1420s, likely one of the museum's oldest icons. A set of 4 icons take the lines of the well-known Orthodox hymn to the Mother of God, the Axion Estin, as their subject matter. From left to right, top to bottom, the icons run, "It is truly meet to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure and the Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim and more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim, thou who without corruption gavest birth to God the Word, the very Theotokos, thee do we magnify." This coming winter, the Yale Russian Choir will offer an in-gallery program where they will sing a selection of hymns represented in our icons. As visitors make their way out of the Langton Gallery, they pass a section dedicated to feasts of the church, including this vivid icon of Christ's descent into Hades and resurrection from the tomb. To the left of the elevator and stairs, as visitors leave the upper floor, is an impressive icon of the Last Judgment, which recalls the apocalyptic fervor that marked Russian iconography during the periods of political instability of the 16th and 17th centuries. In Orthodox churches, it is common for an image of the Last Judgment to be placed above the doorway as people leave the building. Thus, it is fitting that visitors should pass this icon as they make their way down to the ground floor of the museum. A major construction project in 2008 joined the historic jailhouse and police station next door to the main museum and serves as our special exhibition space. On view now through the end of the summer is a lone exhibition entitled Icons, Old Believers in Their World, which introduces to visitors the iconographic traditions of the Old Believers, a sect of Russian Orthodox Christians excommunicated from the mainstream church over their rejection of liturgical and social reforms in the 17th century. As the Icon Museum and Study Center enters its 3rd decade, the coming years are filled with a number of exciting exhibitions and projects as we aim to more fully share the world of Eastern Christian sacred art with the public. Seasonal tours, scholarly conferences, and public programs invite people of all backgrounds to enter the world of the Holy Icon. In doing so, we work to strike a balance between content that is accessible to the general public, engaging for scholars and experts, while presenting such content in a manner that resonates with the faithful whose traditions we represent. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Christine. My background is in Native Studies and Native Art History, and in Native Studies it's traditional to start with a land acknowledgement. So I just want to acknowledge our presence today on the lands, the historical lands of the Potawatomi and Miami bands and tribes, as well as our contemporary Indigenous hosts today, and I thank them for their graciousness. The Museum of Fine Arts Houston, or MFAH, is an encyclopedic museum. We hold globally broad collections that encompass multiple cultures over time and space. Over 5,000 years and 6 continents of object making, as stated in our mission statement, and we are charged with maintaining universal appeal and unprejudiced object care. To achieve this, we, like all encyclopedic museums, embrace secularization theory, the idea that religion runs counter to shared modern spaces, and that religious practice should be relegated to the realm of the private individual. As heritage studies scholar Dennis Burns states, quote, "Once inside museums, religious objects are quarantined from the devotional practices of believers," end quote. Encyclopedic museums have developed an interpretive culture around collections objects that favor particular approaches, namely the aesthetic and the historical. Religion can appear in these interpretive contexts, but only as historical fact, a moment of context. Rare are the attempts to embed objects within religious practices, especially living ones. Rarer still are interpretations of objects that highlight their spiritual meanings or content. And here I call on an example from our museum director, Gary Tintereau, which he uses to illustrate this point. The cloisters in New York City is forbidden from aligning its devotional objects and furniture in a way that resembles an altar, despite the fact that such objects would have originally been designed for an altar space. And you can see that here in one of their gallery images. They are instead installed and discussed as aesthetically beautiful objects for admiration, in other words, not for adoration. Enter the World Faiths Initiative, or WFI. 2025 marked year 6 of funding from the Lilly Endowment to pursue our umbrella program that aims to foster conversations in faith, religion, and spirituality across the museum's permanent collections through innovative programming and reimagined displays. Focusing on the many expressions of faith in the collections, the initiative honors the diverse communities of Houston and inspires connections across cultures and beliefs. And what I just gave you was the WFI mission statement in a nutshell. We have 2 main areas in which we work. The first is interpretive culture. Our most ambitious project in this area was an exhibition called Living with the Gods. At the end of our first 5-year grant cycle in December 2024, this special exhibition consisted of both permanent collection objects and objects on loan. Organized via themes, the exhibition gathered religious objects from various traditions to put them in conversation with one another. A taki, for instance, or a Pacific Islander spirit bearer, which you see right there in the front, in the shape of a crocodile, sat near a European painting of a saint, for instance, underpinning the spiritual roles that connected them. The exhibition joined what in encyclopedic museums are usually administered as distinct collecting areas with specifically assigned curators, to instead find commonalities across time periods, cultures, and traditions. Our second area of work is programming, and Living with the Gods jump-started this area for us. One community partnership provided an ash altar and penance from the local Zoroastrian temple, and they remained on loan through 2025. We also reached out to local faith leaders of various traditions for our programmed events. For instance, here, a world-renowned Hindu dancer from Houston bringing in her troupe for a performance. Exhibitions like Living with the Gods, however, have long turnarounds. At MFAH, we are on a 3-year planning cycle for our exhibitions. So logistically, large-scale exhibition work is ambitious. Programs have become a faster way to reach our initiative's goals and our audiences. On New Year's Day, for instance, we hosted a Zen Buddhist priest to walk us through a meditation practice to commemorate the new year. This was the 2nd year of hosting the event, and attendance has consistently been high, with over 120 attendees, which on New Year's Day is quite an achievement. We ask all program leaders to connect 2 works of art on view, and here you can see the priest, Royce Johnson. He's seated there with the light on his face. He's sitting in front of a Jennifer Steinkamp work called Trees, and Johnson specifically talked about the importance of trees in Buddhist life as both metaphor and inspiration before he guided us through the meditation. This spring was our first densely packed event schedule, featuring Buddhist meditations, a cross-cultural tea ceremony, a panel discussion, a Torah workshop with a Jewish scribe, a Hindu celebration of Shiva Nataraja, Byzantine chanting, and an Islamic art lecture. We strive to represent multiple religious traditions in a variety of formats. Now that we have had our first full programming season, curators are familiar with our goals and have themselves begun to think along initiative lines. For example, Beth Schneider, our consulting curator for Judaica, has researched various traditions of the collections to find a link between embroidered women-made textiles across religious traditions. And here, for instance, are 2 of her found objects, a Christian, one on the left, and on the right, a textile from India. Her goal is to create a public panel and workshop that will both cross curatorial areas of expertise and increase the representation of women artists in our historical collections, something that can be very hard to do in historical religious traditions. Schneider's idea is a model for what is possible across the collections. Schneider is also modeling what on the administration side of the museum is needed. Employees who are encouraged to converse across one's usually siloed work. Like most encyclopedic museums, the MFAH is large with a staff of 640. Administration has traditionally been managed through silos. To connect and inspire faith-themed activities across the entire museum space is important because the silos behind the scenes often produce the results that are public. Dividing the galleries, for instance, echoes the divisions of the curatorial department. Our WorldFace Initiative grant covers a project manager, which is myself, whose job is to cross departments, and I am one of the only positions at the museum intentionally staffed to work across those departments as part of my job description. It's just not how we staff our museum. Our goals for the WorldFace Initiative must translate, we have found, into administrative structure in order to succeed at the institutional level. But how do we justify this work in the first place, especially as that secular encyclopedic museum? As a space of universal appeal, how do we embrace work with religious underpinnings? To live out our mission of being a welcoming and inclusive place for all people, which is part of our mission statement, a consciousness of religious diversity is a necessary part of the audience picture at MFAH. Houston has now outpaced New York City in terms of its demographic diversity along racial, ethnic, and nationality lines. Todd Ferguson of the Boniac Institute reports that, quote, over 58% of all Harris County residents were affiliated with a religion in 2020, end quote. The Pew Research Center, in their more recent religious landscape study of 2023 to 2024, found that only 25% of Houstonians identify as religiously unaffiliated, which leaves a whopping 75% with some sort of religious tie or background. This means that Houston is becoming more and more religiously dynamic, in Ferguson's phrasing. Rather than reflecting today's trending toward the category of nones, or people with no religious affiliations, Houston and the broader Harris County are actually growing their religious ranks. What the WorldFace Initiative aims to do then is diversify our museum audience along the lines of religious diversity. To be responsible to our demographics, we have to honor and find ways to connect to our religious publics. At the moment, we have the exhibition Buddha Nature on view. The curator, Hao Sheng, structured 5 viewing rooms, each based on a Buddhist theme, where a viewer can contemplate specially lit ancient depictions of Buddha, as well as a contemporary artwork. Rooms are intentionally spare. It is one of the remarks commonly overheard among visitors in the gallery, who note their surprise at how empty the spaces are. This allows for meditative walking and pondering through the space. And during our Dharma talk on March 12th, seen here, our program leader had visitors perambulate slowly around the Buddha in the first gallery for a walking meditation, which you see here. This exhibition was not an explicit part of the WorldFace Initiative, as it was already in the exhibition pipeline, but our grant has provided exhibition support work, including marketing, an exhibition audio guide, and the exhibition's associated programs. This is a small exhibition for our institution, and it would not otherwise have had these elements without the work of the WorldFace Initiative. Attendance has been high, with nearly 27,000 visitors already viewing the exhibition, which is still on view through May 10th. To tell new stories in a large encyclopedic museum comes with challenges. One of our largest sits in our modern and contemporary galleries, which for us are segregated into their own building. We are currently working on labels across collections that highlight WorldFace Initiative content, and there are very few labels to install in this entire building. As the lead curator of these galleries has emphasized, few artists of the modern and contemporary periods were concerned with religion. How do we then make connections across the spaces? And for us, this means connections across our various buildings that seem equal in treatment, relatable to our publics, and consistent in our interpretations. Collections building, the types of works that we purchase and install, may be a long-term solution here, but one that takes collective institutional will over time. An example of this will does sit in our Judaica gallery, housed in a different building, where a recent purchase, a contemporary menorah, sits on view. The Judaica gallery was created in the first 5 years of the grant and demonstrates this collective will because it added both dedicated gallery space and collections objects in what was, for us at the time, a very new story. Telling new stories or old stories in new ways has been part of our challenge. This is seen in our programming. In mid-April, we held a tea ceremony. Sweets were provided by Persian community members as we commemorated the Hafseen table of the Nowruz New Year, along with matcha, which you see here, whisked by hand by trained practitioners in the Japanese tea tradition. And in May, we will hold a concert featuring the Byzantine chanting tradition, with a priest coming to explain various vestments and implements, and a cantor leading a pasha, or Orthodox Easter-inspired program in our European galleries, spaces that can be hard to activate in new ways. As part of this cycle with our Lilly grant, we work with Slover Lynette to poll our audiences about their expectations on seeing religion in our institution. We are halfway through our research project. A first phase of face-to-face interviews with both community faith partners and randomly encountered Houstonians, both inside and outside the museum, has been completed, and we are preparing to launch a second phase of quantitative surveys among a Houstonian sample. What we have found so far in the process aligns with larger findings by the American Alliance of Museums. Museums are largely understood as public spaces. As such, community members can be wary of religious content if it is perceived as proselytizing. But audience members also want to see themselves inside the institution. They are fiercely proud of their representation, and they want such representation to be equal. Although what such equity is based on, for us, is an unresolved question, as our director likes to remind us. Worldwide population statistics, Houston demographics, an equal seat at the table, all of those options carry a different result. So it's unresolved in our institution of what equal looks like. The World Faith Initiative is one iteration of the inclusion of religion and spirituality within an art museum setting. We have been encouraged by visitor response, but await our survey work for more details on how we are doing and whether our current efforts match our audience expectations. What we have seen in our galleries and our programs suggests that new stories can be told so that religious objects are not quarantined from the devotional practices of believers after all, even as we work to honor the public spaces and public expectations that we are beholden to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If we could have our panelists come up to the front. Oh, Elliot, if you'd like to come up to the front too. Thanks. That's great. Well, good to hear it. Well, I'd say that was a strong start to the day. We have some time for questions if anyone has a question. Well, I can start and break the ice. I'm wondering, and this came up, I really started to think about it in your presentation, Elliot, and it was a strand that was through Siddhartha's presentation as well. But I was really wondering, and I think it's a question for all of you. There seems to be, and I'm not sure about the MFA Houston, so maybe you can share a little bit, a historical memory to the buildings or space. I was struck by the sort of jail, and then yours was explicitly about historical memory. And so I'm wondering, to what extent does the historical memory of place or physical building structure, and then maybe how that shifted over time in the current community and the current space and atmosphere, shape the identity of the institution? And you talked a bit explicitly about this, but just feel free to share in whatever way, and I'm curious about the MFA Houston as well.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So yes, definitely the site of a church has inspired where we are right now in thinking about the museum. But in the past 3 years, there's been a real significant uptick in the donations that we've been getting, which is great at a moment like this, and increasing talk about a new building. Because in addition to that steeple that blocks the view, there's no parking. It's a public space in the middle of a private campus that's affectionately been called a hidden gem on the heart of campus. And I think we should be the handshake, and as a South Asian, gems are not meant to be hidden. So what is happening is the dining hall is about to be torn down because the college has built a new dining hall, and that is an ideal location for a new museum. So now in the next phase, I'm starting to think, what does it mean to have been a dining hall for 80 years at this college, and what memories are in this land that can also meet the energy of the church in some new formation?
Nourishment for the soul.
Yes? Yeah?
So we've inherited both these two buildings that have lived many lives as courthouse, as jail, as police station, as offices, as Steeple, maybe I mentioned Steeple. But we've also inherited a person. So we have this sort of larger than life personality of Gordon Langton, sort of an American industrialist in living memory. So not someone sort of confined to the 19th century, but someone that most people who work at the museum knew. And he is, I never met him. He's beloved. He sort of lives sort of largely in the building. For me, he's a bit of an enigma. When I first interviewed at the museum, I thought to myself, I can usually sort of tell what angle people bring to their art by what they collect. And I was like, this guy has to have been Orthodox or Slavic. These icons are so churchy. They're not, you can sometimes tell when it's like, the Madonna and Child and Jesus over and over and over. It's accessible to a lot of people, but these sort of large icons of the Last Judgment and really obscure Russian saints. And anyway, but he was sort of a vaguely church-going Presbyterian. And so there's this interesting, we have all these layers of identity. We were the Museum of the Russian Icon. We were a sort of an important Slavic cultural institute for, roughly 2 decades. We're sort of living into this new identity, trying to figure out how we represent and continue to be accessible to the people who see it as their space, while also making our very specific, we only have Eastern Christian sacred art. That's pretty much everything. We have a mummy. We have a mummy portrait. And something that I find to be really fun. It's a small institution, it's a small staff, so I am also very involved in education and programming, and I love giving tours, and I love talking with people and sort of getting a sense of, if I ask a question like, well, what do you see in this icon? And someone says, oh, there's a guy with a beard. I'm like, great, good start. That's Jesus, and we're gonna go from there. And that's really helpful, whereas other people will say like, well, that's clearly, that label's wrong. It's, a decade later in Northern Russia. And I'm like, okay, that's sort of a different background. So I think your question was sort of about buildings and memory. We have sort of institutional, personality-wise, I would say that the building itself is actually, even though it does have these jail cells in the basement, and as I was preparing for this talk, I was like, I should probably look into what was going on in those jail cells and what the story is. I didn't do that, but that could be an interesting project for the future. But people are really drawn to the jail cells. It's really interesting. People kind of love them. I think not just as a curiosity, but I think they add this really intense human component to the space, which I think resonates with our collection. As I say to a lot of visitors, if you want to go look at just beautiful art, you can go to the MFA in Boston or the Isabella Stewart Gardner. If you want art that is beautiful but also weird and a little challenging, this is a good place to come. So.
You can do a question.
Yes, thank you so much for these presentations. I have a question for Christina, but I believe also for Siddhartha, and it has to do with the World Faith Initiative, but it's more of a general, broader question. There is still a lot of nervousness, anxiety among liberal institutions, encyclopedic museums about the idea of representing religion. And one of the common anxieties is that everyone must feel represented, which is of course a very noble scope. At the same time, then I wonder if the work of curators, directors becomes dealing with the issue how I can make everyone happy, so to say. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more outside of the script, so to say, how to negotiate this difficulty between the need of including religion within the world of Mead Art Museums and Peabody Museums, and also the challenge how I can make everyone happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, our director is basically like from the get-go, I will never make everyone happy. So, I mean, I think we are led by somebody who's been through the fire enough that sort of like, there's no way to please everyone. And I think part in Houston, one of our problems is that there's so much religious diversity. So, for instance, another Lilly grantee is the Children's Museum just down the street from us. And they have used some of that funding to put in what they call Faithful Friends, which is looking at children in religious spaces in their communities in Houston. But they had limited space, and so they had to choose, they chose the 7 top demographic groups, right? What are the 7 largest religious groups and affiliations in Houston, and that's who made their exhibition. When we're thinking through programming, it's just gotten so much more complicated than that. So for instance, with Buddha Nature, our Dharma talk was led by a Tibetan Buddhist, and when I reached out to a Zen Buddhist community of students, they were like, our leader actually says we shouldn't go to a Tibetan Buddhism talk. And so I'm sorry, thank you for reaching out, but we can't attend. Right, and so that diversity and the kinds of differences between groups really starts to blossom when you start to dig into those community relationships, especially. And you can't do it all. So for us, there's a limited amount of resources that kind of governs what we can do and how much, and then we're mindful, well, maybe next year we can do something that's oriented in this other direction. But that our institutional resources help make some of those decisions.
If I can just add briefly, I think I'm so interested in the initiative that you're working on, is that it becomes dangerous when an outside party wants to direct the way that a religion is being presented. So if the World Faiths Initiative is housed within the MFA Houston and that retains control, it's very different from, let's say, a Hindu donor offering a lot of money, wanting to show more Indian art, and I, as a scholar of Indian art, needing to present a version of that religion that is potentially deeply problematic and aligned with things like Hindu nationalism or Islamophobia. You know, this is where it gets really, really tricky. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We have time for maybe one more question.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you all so much for being here. It's really interesting. And I'm here sort of like I was working in museums during grad school, but I'm primarily here as an artist who sort of focuses on a sense of divinity that's a little pan. You know, I have a Hindu teacher, I grew up Jewish, but I'm curious about like how, you know, this kind of like answer that a lot of people give these days about like their religious orientations, like I'm spiritual, not religious, and I wonder if that is somehow like a way in, and how you as institutions think about, maybe not your institution, but maybe engaging with artists who are making work that is about a sense of divinity or unity today, and how that works with a collection. That's something that you think about, those kind of two things together.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've had some really great curator conversations. Again, my job as project manager is I'm sort of a manager. I'm not the decision maker, right, for what happens. But we do have some curators who are starting to think about, I think, as they approach their own purchases and how they're going to grow the collection, are starting to think, well, maybe I really need to think about some artists who are intentionally engaging these themes. And that's how we get some of these voices into the museum, particularly in the modern contemporary period, right? That they have to intentionally think about that in what they're doing. Yeah.
I think that I lived in Northern California for 12 years. So spirituality was like really like the lingua franca there. And I am sometimes a little itchy about it. And because it's often like a fast food spirituality. And I don't want to encourage college students to kind of try any kind of fast track to feeling good or any of that. And so I think actually in terms of like collection building, to find works that really emphasize humanity and like shared experiences is inching towards what is maybe spirituality, but is really like the universality of something. So we acquired one work by that was about menstruation and the stigma around menstruation in various countries. And we knew that many of our students would be able to relate to that. And it could create all kinds of dialogue around labor, woman, culture, religion, all of this. So we're kind of thinking about humanity as a way to think about spirituality.
If I can briefly add, I think my hope is that icons can be accessible to people of any and no religious background, the people who have their entry point. But I think there are these themes of love and death and sacrifice and birth and nurturing that are totally authentic to the content, the sort of explicitly religious content of icons, but I have found to be a very effective way to get people into the icon, even if they might even feel a resistance to organized religion, using these sort of fundamental human experiences as a way to invite them in.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again to our first panelists of the day. Thank you very much.